Hello YouTube, Sean here. Welcome to my channel, It's all good. And today we are here at the Swedish Cabin in Delaware County, Pennsylvania. This cabin is a very special place. I think in Delaware County people know it as a place sort of like a Lover's Lane kind of area where I think, high schoolers and locals come down here after, when there's nothing else to do. But it's actually a very important place in American history. And I want to tell you about it today. One of the crazy things about living in this area is that we're surrounded by such history like this. This is the 7th oldest building in America, right here, 7. That's 5 plus 2. And I've seen the 2 oldest in New Mexico. They're in Santa Fe. The oldest one is actually a government building. I think it's like the state house or the governor's building in Santa Fe, New Mexico. The second oldest is a Catholic church that was built by Native American Indians, the Pueblo people, and the Spanish settlers, conquistadors in New Mexico. And then, the third oldest building is actually in New Jersey, and it's an old log cabin built by the Finnish. And we'll talk about that in a sec. Then you skip a couple, like there's a building down in Virginia and Jamestown that's older, and then one up in Massachusetts and another one in Connecticut. So you got the 2 in New Mexico, the third one in New Jersey, a couple more, and then you get to this one right here. And that's the seventh oldest building in America, the whole country, right there. The lower 48 states, okay? But in the lower 48 states, this is it. In Delaware County, I don't know. It's pretty wild. Välkommen. That's nice. Now, to tell you a little bit about this, I mentioned, maybe you saw it on the sign or in the title, that this is called the Swedish Cabin. And I mentioned briefly that it was built by Swedish people. And you might be wondering, what the heck are the Swedes doing here? Because this area, as you know, from being from Philly and Pennsylvania, we think of this area as having been settled by the English, right? Like William Penn and that whole group of people. But actually, this area was first settled by the Swedes. The Swedes, and if you look deeper into the history of it, you realize that Swede was a catch-all term for anyone from Scandinavia. So there were also Finnish people here, although they kind of get lumped in with the Swedes. And I want to bring that up because, I'll probably visit the other cabin that's over in New Jersey that's nearly as old. But it was called the Finnish cabin, and that cabin over in New Jersey was built by the Finns. And there's a little bit of a question here about whether this cabin was built by the Swedes or the Finns. Let me show you what I mean. Now, when we come back to the sign, you can see where it says evidently. That's a very, well-placed word right there, evidently. And the reason that matters is that no one's really sure who built this. There probably was Swedish people, but it could have been Finns. And if the Finnish built it, that would be very interesting. To explain a little more, when New Sweden was founded, the Swedes came here and they wanted to basically colonize this area before the Dutch could get to it. So they built a colony called New Sweden, which is at the end of Darby Creek. This is Darby Creek, and if you go down, you hit New Sweden on the coast where Darby Creek meets the Delaware. And that's where the Swedes built their colony. And Johan Prince, the governor of New Sweden, he had a mandate to colonize this area and Christianize the Lenape Indians. And the way that he decided to do that was by building cabins up the creeks and then building mills to bring industry and start making the land productive. So he wanted these cabins to become farms and then to build mills on the creeks, right, like this, right? So that's probably what this cabin started as. It was probably an outpost of the Swedish colony. It probably predates Johan Prince. It would have been built here, you know, as early as 1638, as the sign says. Now, Johan Prince showed up in 1640, 1642, something like that. And then he left in 1650, 1653. So in that time period, we don't have any records of a settlement here necessarily in this location up Darby Creek. But we do know that Johan Prince went up Cobb's Creek and he built a mill up that way. And he built other settlements up the other creeks. So there's a pretty good chance he either constructed this one, or maybe no record exists because maybe it didn't exist yet while Johan Prince was here. But the other reason there may not be a record of it here in the 1640s and 1650s is that it was already here and they didn't feel like they needed to write it down because everybody already knew that this is where a cabin was, right? Maybe. It could also have just been forgotten. You never know. But the point is that it's been here since the Swedes and the Finns. And when the Swedes came over to colonize, they basically the Swedes have an interesting relationship with the Finns. I've explained this in other videos, but essentially the Finnish were conquered by the Swedish, and they were more or less indentured servants. And they would have come with the Swedish would have sent Finnish people ahead of them to colonize this area and build cabins like this. And the Swedes also would have brought Finnish workers with them to work the land and to build cabins like this, okay? So there's a very strong possibility that this Swedish cabin was actually built by a Finnish person. I looked into the design of Swedish and Finnish cabins. I couldn't find any distinguishing features that would allow me to decide, but maybe a historian of log cabins would know better. I don't know. But yeah, let's take a closer look at the cabin now that I've given it an introduction. All right, so you can see that this building has two distinct parts to it, right? There's a partition, and on this side is 2/3 of the house and about 1/3 over here, and then a little shed. And the reason this house appears this way is that it was actually this part over here is an addition, a later addition, and the 2/3 on the left that's the original portion of the building. And this building has gone through many different hold on one second. Sorry, I had to take a pause there because I noticed that there's a car parked right there and it pulled up while I was filming. And like I said, this place is known to locals as a little bit of an out-of-the-way place to come do some fun, nefarious things in the woods. And maybe that's what they're doing. I don't know. We'll leave them alone. But yeah, anyway, this cabin was built in two parts. There's the older part here and then the addition. And there's a theory that this older part was this is the original. This is the original building. And then there's a theory that this second part was added when another wave of immigrants from Sweden and Finland came to visit, or came to colonize. They landed at New Sweden, and probably either a family of Swedes or another Swedish worker came up the creek and wanted to stay permanently, so this extra bit was added. And you can see up there, we'll take a closer look, but there are two chimneys. So you can see that part back there was really meant to be its own living quarter. Now, one thing that's really interesting that becomes very apparent when you get up close to this building is that you can still see the bark from the trees that were used to build this thing. I mean, that bark will come off. It's real bark. I don't know. So here's the thing. I know a little bit about log cabin building because I really love to research that, and it's been a dream of mine to build a log cabin or some sort of outdoor building in the woods and kind of live a little bit like the settlers lived back in the day, right? Or even the Lenape before them. And so I've looked at how to build log cabins. And one thing I do know is that one of the first steps when you build a log cabin is that you have to remove this bark. You have to remove the bark. And the reason is that the wood rots if you don't. If you don't take off the bark, there's moisture underneath the bark and the wood will rot. So I'm very curious as to why the bark is still on this building and why it didn't rot away over the years. If anybody knows about that, I'd love to learn. So please leave a comment in the comments section about why you would leave bark on a log cabin like that. I don't know. Look at these iron spikes. You can see the old plaster. Reddish here, and then this white plaster. And in some of the old photos, the building is covered in white plaster, and I believe at some point someone, maybe the Parks Commissioner of Delaware County, I'm not sure, I forget who did it, but someone whitewashed this whole building with white paint. So I wonder if that actually ended up preserving the building a little more. Here, let's take a little peek inside here, if you can see any. I don't know. Oh yeah, look at that. And there's that fireplace in the corner. Maybe we'll come back for a tour sometime. I'm sure they give tours here. I am sure. Now this back area, this little shed, this is very modern. And in fact, I'm pretty sure this wasn't even here the last time I came here, 10 or 15 years ago. Now it could have been a reconstruction that is faithful to the original structure, and it's been built back up. I don't know, but I'm pretty sure it's a modern addition. And it's probably just a municipal shed of some sort. And you can see how the logs were hewn, and you can see that the logs are fit perfectly into notches like that. That's a typical Swedish Scandinavian design, and it makes it's very easy it's very quick and easy, because you just basically, instead of taking a draw knife and spending all that time removing the bark, usually back in the day, you'd have a knife called a draw knife, and you'd sit there and you'd scrape off all the bark, right? Well, that takes a while. So sometimes it's faster if, instead of taking off the bark, you just chop off the 3 sides of the log. That removes the bark, and it shapes it perfectly to be stacked to build a log cabin, just like that. Now, obviously, if you do that this way, there's going to be these gaps, right? And this is plaster, but underneath the plaster, back in the day, they would have used moss and something called oakum, which is sort of an old-timey log cabin building material. Someone who knows more about oakum can correct me, but I believe oakum is it is rope made of some sort of rope, like maybe cotton, not cotton. Yeah, I'm not sure what the rope would have been made of, but a rope that's essentially dipped into like a resin. I think oil, maybe linseed oil. It could also be a birch tar. I kind of forget exactly what it is, but it's a rope that's been dipped in something that gives it waterproofing capabilities, and then it would be stuffed in between these logs along with moss and other stuff to keep it insulated. And then on top of that, the builders would have used something like cob to really seal it off with waterproofing. And basically a cut. Oh, there they go. Holy moly. I don't know what they were up to. Oh, I smell something. I know what they were doing. So there you go. That's what people use this place for. Anyway, yeah, Delco, right? Yeah, I mean, again, this place, I know I was talking about Cobb, we'll come back to it, but this place is one of those spots where people come down here for all sorts of stuff. You know, Lover's Lane style interactions, all sorts of drugs and whatnot. I mean, people, let's put it this way. When I come down here in the past, I've been a little sketched out. I haven't been here in like 10 years maybe, so it looks a lot better. But in the past, it used to be a little sketchy. And you can see right here where my finger is, there's an emergency, button you can push to call the police immediately if you get in trouble. And the reason that's there is that this area is pretty unsafe, or it used to be. I think it looks very nice now. I think there's a group called the Friends of the Lower Swedish Cabin, and they've done a good job cleaning this place up and restoring this cabin so that we have it for posterity. Thank you to them, right? Because back in the day, this place was a little sketchy, as a lot of these historic places are in Delaware County. This place was a little sketchy, and it was covered in trash. It was run down. I remember there being needles all over the place here. I could be making that up, but certainly, people come down here to do all sorts of stuff, as you just saw. That car peeled out pretty quick when they realized I was filming. So yeah, that's what it is. So let's get back to the cabin. Okay. All right, so as I was saying, the settlers would have used something called oakum, which is like a rope dipped in oil or resin of some sort and stuffed in between the logs. They would have also then used cob material, which is essentially like it's clay from the creek, which is very good clay, and I've played with that clay a lot in my life when I was a kid, especially. So there's clay from the creek, a little bit of sand, and straw, like hay, which gives the mud like a little more stability. And then you can use that when you mix the straw, the sand, and the clay, and a little bit of gravel together. You get something called, which nowadays we call it cob, but it's essentially just mud for building a mud hut. And it works really well. It's one of the it's an ancient building material that humans have used for tens of thousands of years, and the Swedes would have used it in between the logs to basically fill the gaps. Yeah. Now, one of the other interesting things about this cabin architecturally that is worth taking a look at is, first of all, if you look at the ground, you can see that starting over there and running here is this probably would have been an old stone wall at some point, right? So there's an old wall here, the foundations of it at least. And then you can see that when the Swedes or Finns, whoever built this, when the settlers built this cabin, they specifically put the corner of the cabin on a rock. And this huge rock probably extends down into the earth quite a bit. Same with that rock. And the reason for doing this is to basically give the cabin stability and over time, because it's on a wet area next to the creek, so this ground may not be super stable. The cabin, when it was built, would have probably settled a lot and shifted around. So building it on this rock would have given the ground stability. It also would have been very good during floods. And as you know, we're near a creek. This creek floods, and in the past, it's definitely, I'm sure it's come up and flooded this cabin several times, which makes sense, and it therefore makes sense to build the cabin on a river rock. This is a rock that would have been, basically under the water during floods, but stable, right? So you build the cabin on a stable rock that survives the floods so that your cabin survives the floods. Something like that. I hope I explained that logic well. But you can see, there is termite damage. There is some termite damage. This is modern mortar for sure. That's definitely, you can even see the palette knife or the spreading implement. This is more modern stuff. I did read that this cabin was basically in complete disrepair for many years. And I've seen old photos of it, which I'll put at the end of this clip so you can take a look. This bench is modern. This wouldn't have been here, and I think the windows are also fairly, they're not super modern necessarily, but they are not the original. These windows would have been added sometime later, and you can see it's just plastic, and it's plastic over the old windows, and that's partly because people have broken them many times. They've thrown rocks through it, broken into there. I think at some point people have squatted. Homeless people have squatted in this building. Look at the lean. Can you see the lean on this wall? How it looks pretty good. I'm not gonna lie. They've done a very good job restoring this building. It looks very good to me. And now you can really see the two chimneys for the two additions, this apartment here and then the main building here. And one thing you'll notice, also I just want to point out, these gutters are not original. This building would not have had gutters. So, but this would have been added. I think this building was fixed up in maybe last 5 years, 10 years, and it would have been added sometime during that time. But anyway, you can see that the fireplace is in a curious area. When you're looking at English cabins and you're looking at Spanish cabins and French cabins, the Spanish, or the English, they like to put their fireplaces on the wall against the long side, right? So a cabin is a rectangle, and it has two long sections and then two short walls. And along the short wall, the English would have put the chimney and the fireplace. That's the tradition that I think has caught hold in America as well. But the original Swedish cabin style, the style of Swedish cabin that the Swedes used, they put the chimney in the corner. So look at that, when they built this second area. Let's see if we can see inside. I don't think we can. It's not gonna work. Oh, a little bit. Let's see. Okay, you can see inside there's some implements. Let's go around and I'll show you the chimney. But essentially, you can see both chimneys are on this side of the house, and that's because the fireplaces were put in the corners of the buildings, not on the long side the way the German and the French would have done, and not on the short side the way the English would have. So you can see that the fireplace is in the corner there. All right, it's hard to see, but hopefully you got a glimpse of that. And I don't know what this rope design is. I don't know what that's about. There's all sorts of stuff. I mean, I noticed here on the ground there's some old, maybe a wreath, some sort of something from Christmas that would have been a wreath maybe for the door. And there's this shelf. This is modern. They would have added that shelf. So yeah, people are definitely visiting, but I wanted to show you the distinction, that distinct fireplace makes this cabin very, very interesting from a design perspective. And then of course there's this bark on the tree, and you'll notice this on this side of the cabin, when they built it, they used stone instead of that cob material I was talking about earlier. Well, they probably used cob between the stones as well. So let's take a look. But it's so strange. Look how they left the bark right up on the log. It looks all rotten to me. You can see underneath there's it's pretty rotten looking, but it seems to have survived somehow. I don't know why. And then look at that old nail. Anything with a nail is probably not original, so this beam right here, this long vertical beam, presumably it's supposed to sit sort of right in this notch, but it was put here maybe because it's not as wide as they were expecting when they built it. And it has these nails. You can see all sorts of nails. And the thing is, nails in colonial times were very rare, so they wouldn't have used nails to build this cabin. In fact, one of the things that makes Finnish cabin building so spectacular, and then also the Swedish style, but specifically Finnish people, they were very good at building cabins without nails, which is very important. It's one of the reasons the log cabin became such a feature of American life. One of the reasons is that you don't need nails to build log cabins. You can just fit the logs together like that, like you saw with the triangle and the notch. It's very easy to build log cabins without nails. So, if you know anything about the way this area was settled, you know that as I mentioned earlier, the English came later, right? And when the English came, they didn't really know how to build things like this. They didn't build log cabins. Now, why is that? Well, if you think about it, in England, England is an island, and it's very small. And by most likely, even in Neolithic times, before we have historic records, I'm talking like 3000 BC or 4000 BC, the time when Stonehenge was built. By then, even the landscape in Britain would have been cleared of trees. So the trees would not have been very, they would have been rarer, more, used for probably burning wood or burning, used for fires, and less available for building structures. So, log cabin building wasn't a thing that the English did as much. It was, or the Irish. Irish people aren't known for log cabin building, as far as I know, right? Irish people, please correct me if I'm wrong about that. But up in Scandinavia, in Sweden, the north of Sweden, and especially in Finland, there were tons of trees. And the Swedes and the Finns really perfected the art of log cabin building, and which the English and the Irish later learned when they arrived. So that's my understanding of log cabin history. And this is one of the finest log cabins from that time, one of the only log cabins from that time in the 1600s, 1650s. and when the Swedish showed up here and started colonizing Delaware County and Pennsylvania by building these cabins all over. They would have been all over the creeks and all over the landscape of Delaware County. And this is the only one that's left. There you go. Now, I mentioned the Irish came along, and the Irish are a major part of Delaware County history, because they came with the they came with the English settlers, and really provided the labor that the Industrial Revolution needed to continue growing and developing Delaware County. So a lot of the railroads around here were built by Irish people. A lot of the mills were worked by Irish people. The mines were mined in Delaware County by Irish people. And they arrived at a different time than, the Swedes did. When the Swedes arrived and the Finns, there was nothing here. They settled, they built this cabin. And then fast forward 150 or 200 years, and the Irish arrived. The English took over, and they brought over the Irish, similar to how the Swedes brought the Finns as indentured servants. Swedish had conquered the Finnish, and so they brought the Finnish over. Same way, similarly, the English brought the Irish, and when the Irish showed up, they built houses that were like this. There's not much to see. Obviously, it's a bit of a ruin at the moment. But this would have been a house that probably Irish immigrants to Upper Darby would have lived in. You can see it's pretty destroyed. You can see the old mortar just crumbling. Now, I did find a photo of this building before, when it was still erect. Wow, look at this brick. Wonder how old this brick is. I bet this brick is 200 years old right there, maybe. Yeah, so I did find a photo, and I will put that photo into this video. Maybe I'll put the photo in right now. Ancients are watching. I think ducks count, right? Ducks are birds. They're not birds of prey. I do see a raven up there, but I like these ducks. Oh, yeah, maybe the ancients are watching on this gray day in Pennsylvania. I don't see any birds of prey, but yeah, so it's an interesting place. I have a few memories here. I don't come here often. Again, I haven't been here in like 20 years, but I do know that people come here a lot, more than usual, especially now that this area has been cleaned up a lot. You can see how nice it looks behind me. So, yeah. Whoever's taking care of it is doing a good job. Thank you to the friends of the Lower Swedish Cabin. And I wanted to say, I guess we're coming to the end of this video, and I wanted to say a few more things. One thing is, I wanted to note that there was an upper Swedish cabin. This is called the Lower Swedish Cabin, which implies the existence of the Upper Swedish Cabin. And that cabin did exist for many years, all the way up until the mid-20th century, at some point, maybe in the 40s. I don't know exactly when, but it burned down, sadly. So, these places, like this cabin, they burn down. They're made of wood. They don't last forever. So it's good to see them while they're around. You never know. Some vandal, some no-gooder, what is it? No good doer? Whatever. Someone might chuck a cigarette through that window or something and the whole thing will burn down. It's possible, and that's what happened to the Upper Swedish Cabin. So it's no longer here, but I do want to go find the foundations of that. So if I'm successful, I'll put it at the end of this video maybe. But then, the other thing I wanted to leave you with is, as we walk away, we say bye. I wanted to talk about what that building means. The Swedish Cabin, what it represents in the landscape of Delaware County. Because, as I always say, we're living in an ancient place. Delaware County has had many different groups of people live here over the years. But the oldest group is the Lenape. And we are on land that the Lenape occupied and lived on for thousands of years. Like before the Egyptians built the pyramids, the Lenape were living in Darby Creek, probably, like right here. So that's a pretty big deal. I mean, this is an ancient place. And the thing is, the Lenape, in their culture, they don't have the same idea of property rights. I think this is something that other people can explain as well. Maybe I'll get this wrong, but the Lenape were mostly migratory. They didn't really have permanent settlements, and they would have migrated down in the spring and summer. They would have migrated into this part of Delaware County to find food and to grow corn in the springtime and summertime, and go hunting and fishing in the creeks here. And then in the winter, they retreat up into the mountains or back up sort of into the Poconos. They would have gone up there where the deer and the elk, because there were elk around here, they would have hunted the deer and the elk as the deer and the elk retreated for winter up into the mountains, where the predators, like wolves, won't follow them as much. So the Indians would have gone, the Lenape would have gone and migrated with the deer and the elk as the animals moved across the landscape. So would the Lenape. They would have followed. And, looking at the Swedish Cabin, you realize that, sure, okay, is it possible that it was built in a quick and dirty way as a non-permanent place, a place where that was a non-permanent settlement? It's possible. I mean, that's maybe one reason you see bark on the logs, is that whoever built the Swedish Cabin did not expect to stay there for a long time. So they didn't remove the bark from the logs because they didn't care if the logs rotted. But, the thing is, that cabin has been there for a long time. And even if you do build a log cabin quick and dirty that way, maybe because winter was approaching or you weren't planning on staying, you just needed a shelter quickly. The thing is, that log cabin has permanence in the landscape. And ever since it was built, nearly 400 years ago, 380 years ago, when it was built, it was the first permanent place here, meaning first permanent building in this landscape. I just walked across a footbridge. Thank you for whoever built the footbridge. Probably, I read that sign earlier. It said there's a grant from the Delco Greenways Municipal Grant Program built that. And this bridge could easily be here for another 380 years. Okay, now why am I saying all this? The point is that the Lenape had nothing like this. They didn't build permanent settlements and buildings that would have allowed them to claim that they lived or were from a specific place, right? Like, of course, they're from this region, the Lenape, but they didn't have this idea of property ownership. To them, land was something that you couldn't really own. Like, you know, like trying to own air. You can't own air. We can get into, you can control airspace. I guess the FAA does control airspace, and you know, we can get into Georgism, which I'd like to cover at some point. But the idea of ownership essentially is very strange when applied to natural resources like air and like water. You know, you can't own a part of the ocean or the water in the sky. That's sort of strange. Or like owning the air is a very good one. It's very strange to say, this is my chunk of air right here, you know. So the Lenape didn't own stuff, and when that cabin was built, it changed this landscape permanently forever. And I just want to bring that up, that the existence of that cabin is very important because it marks the change in the cultural relationship that people had with this landscape when they lived here. All right, we'll leave it there. Thank you for coming on this adventure with me. My name is Sean. This is my channel, It's All Good. We'll be doing a lot more of these kinds of walks and talks. So if you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. If you've been here or you know anything about this place, I'd love to hear from you. I hope I'd see you next time. Bye.